Just like climate scientists sounded alarm on rising temperatures and extreme weather conditions, homes and farmlands across the world have continued to be submerged as a result of heavy floods, forcing people out of their ancestral homes. Sources of livelihood, freshwater resources also continue to be polluted. Worst hit are vulnerable communities in the global south countries, including Nigeria, which contribute less to global greenhouse gas emissions. The COP28 summit held in Dubai, UAE, marked a significant moment in global climate negotiations with the completion of the first global stocktake under the Paris Agreement, where global progress toward limiting temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels was assessed. Nations reached agreements on key issues, notably to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, just transition and equity to ensure that the shift to a low-carbon economy is equitable and does not leave vulnerable communities behind. Other agreements reached are on carbon markets and finance, an agreement on frameworks for international carbon trading, which aims to allow countries meet their climate goals by purchasing carbon credits from others, as well as the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, aimed at providing financial support to developing countries that are suffering greater impacts of climate change.
In our global economy, supply chain shocks raise costs everywhere. Decimated harvests push up food prices everywhere. Destroyed homes increase insurance premiums everywhere. And this is a story of avoidable injustice. The rich cause the problem, the poor pay the highest price.
Even with these breakthroughs, questions have remained about how much progress has been made in implementing the resolutions. Many developing nations waiting for the financial support promised by wealthier countries are already developing cold feet at the sincerity of purpose by the global north at the yearly COPs.
We'll only get the job done if parties are prepared to step forward in parallel, bringing us closer to common ground. So let's cut the theatrics and get down to real business. We can't lose sight of the forest because we're tussling over individual trees. Nor can we afford an outbreak of you-firstism, where groups of parties dig in and refuse to move on one issue until others move elsewhere. This is a recipe for going literally nowhere and could set global climate efforts back at a time when we simply must be moving forward.
In Kenya, the impacts of climate change are an everyday reality. Currently, we are experiencing unusually warmer days, yet only 5 months ago, we experienced horrible floods that led to the deaths of 267 and displaced 281,000 people. The floods also destroyed critical infrastructure, including 1,967 schools, 62 health facilities. Besides, the droughts of last year destroyed livelihoods and killed over 2.4 million livestock.
As the gaps between promises and actions continue to widen and the impacts on vulnerable populations are becoming more catastrophic, civil society groups across Africa are calling for an African People's Counter-COP APCC summit, where decisions on real solutions for the continent's peculiar climate challenges can be sought.
The African countries have sat down to view these issues and have seen that the COP itself has not provided any solutions for Africa and for the host communities that suffer the impacts of this climate change. So these 21 countries came together and organized the African People's Counter-COP to counter the UNFCCC COP. So we can now focus on our issues as Africa and how we can sort our issues out as Africans. So we are saying that we want an end to crude oil extraction and every extraction of fossil fuel in Africa, and also they should also repair these communities. They should do a cleanup of these communities, like the cleanup that is going on in Ogoni. It's supposed to be replicated all over Africa where we are having fossil fuel extraction. So we are calling for that. And then we are also calling for the payment of loss and damages for communities who have lost their lands, people who have lost their businesses due to fossil fuel extraction. There are some communities, like a community in Edo State where they have fuel, it's called Gele Gele, and several other communities in Niger Delta. The US, the UK, the Russia, they should work towards reducing the methane in their own environment before we talk about Africa, because we are the ones suffering the consequences, meanwhile they are the ones doing the pollution.
With increasing climate crisis, many Africans are forced to migrate, risking their lives in dangerous journeys to the global north, or becoming climate refugees within Africa, leading to food, land, and climate and conflict insecurities. Addressing this requires mitigating climate impacts such as drought, flooding, and desertification, and ensuring that communities have the resources to remain in their homeland. 4. Climate debt, reparations, and economic reforms. Climate reparations, alongside colonial reparations, must be paid to African nations and global south, reflecting the scale of damage caused by climate change and historic exploitation. This reparation must be in the form of grants, not loans, that further entrench debts. African countries should focus on value-added beneficiation and strategic partnership that elevates Africa's position in the value chain. There is an urgent need for structural tax reform of the current financial architecture that will ensure transitional corporations, that is TNCS.
At the ongoing COP29, they are demanding the payment of climate debt estimated by environmental economists at about $5 trillion to cover ecological, social, and economic losses suffered by the Global South frontline communities and an end to new fossil fuel projects.
I think that the benefits for countries for the loss and damage fund is something that borders on is a matter of, as we speak, it's a matter of life and death for me. Life because when this fund is given and appropriately used to solve the issues on ground, it will help us and our communities to thrive again. It will help our communities to live again. And death because if this is not done, then our communities will be reduced to mere geographical expressions, because our communities would most likely be wiped out.
The benefit of the southern countries of the recognition and repair of this climate debt depends. Depends on how this climate debt will be repaired. If we think about the reparation, this should be understood at least, let's say, with 5 principles. First of all, we have to stop what is causing the damage that we want to be repaired. And the damage is climate change, and to stop the climate change is to stop the big polluters to continue polluting.
The issue of financing climate adaptation and mitigation has been on for a long time. And we are all aware of the targets that have been set in the past that were never met, or were barely met, or met in various ways that did not really show justice. In 2009, the target was set in the Copenhagen Accord that from 2020, the developed world will contribute $100 billion per year to help the vulnerable impacted nations to adapt to the challenges of global warming.
With the little resources that we have called for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty aimed to put an end to the unchecked proliferation our fossil fuels, and the toxic emissions they produce. We are demanding an end to new fossil fuel projects, a just and equitable transition to renewable energy, and reparations for the loss and damage suffered by our frontline communities. This treaty is a call to high-emitting countries to recognize your historical responsibility and take action, overdue action, now to curb your emissions.
Parties at COP29 are faced with mounting pressure to align their national policies with the Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree target. But while many countries, including Nigeria, have set ambitious net zero targets, the question remains, how fast can the world reduce its dependency on coal, oil, and gas?
With tensions high, the world is now looking to COP29 to answer critical questions on how to bridge the gap between intention and implementation. Well, all eyes are on the global community to see if genuine actions to address the climate crisis will follow promises made in previous summits for a more sustainable future. Nkoli Omhoudu, AIT News, Abuja.